everything comes to the floor in such a hyper-partisan manner?
I would argue that it's already in the Constitution. We've overtaxed people. People like to legislate by emotion.
It's important to address when the governor oversteps his boundaries.
I'll pull up my pocket version here. 1,000-page omnibus bills that nobody knows what's in it. Well, we've got a great show for you this week. We're going to be talking, of course, about the Chauvin verdict that came in, and we're also going to talk about what's happening at the legislature with the omnibus bills this week. We have a green energy omnibus bill piled together with commerce and a bunch of other provisions. We'll talk about the reinsurance program that Republicans following Nancy Pelosi and Angie Craig are trying to socialize our health insurance market again. And then we will also maybe, if we have time, talk about the what happened in Rochester with the city council member, Parks Board member, saying that the American flag now is a symbol of racism and division. So with us, we have got Walter Hudson and Shane Parr. Welcome, gentlemen.
Glad to be here.
So Walter and Shane, obviously, what are your reactions on the Chauvin verdict? Were you expecting this? And then, you know, when the verdict came out right away, was it convincing that it was going to be a guilty on all verdicts, or what was your initial thought?
Well, I feel as though over the course of the past few years, I've been having a kind of a Groundhog's Day experience where I keep expecting reason and precedent and objective reality and the law to prevail. And then the left goes and shows me, no, we've moved past that. This is a brave new world. We're playing by new rules. And in this case, you know, you ask, did I expect it? Honestly, no, I really, truly didn't. I mean, once they said they had deliberated for 10 hours and were coming back, then everybody pretty much knew at that point it's going to be guilty across the board. But prior to that, and all of the discussions that have been happening with players at various levels in the previous few months, the presumption amongst pretty much everybody was there's going to be acquittals on multiple or all of the charges because there's just no case here. Like the capacity of the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, there we go again, expecting the law to prevail, that Derek Chauvin was the cause of George Floyd's death and that it meets the statutory requirements for second and third degree murder. It just didn't seem plausible. And I would argue it didn't actually occur, but here we are. And so because this is the verdict, and because of the context in which it was delivered and the context of the trial itself, I'm left wondering, what does a fair trial even look like going forward? Certainly for police officers, but for any, if we're not going to change the venue when you have domestic terrorists burning down your town for a year, demanding a certain outcome, if we're not going to sequester the jury and insulate them from the president of the United States, the mayor of Minneapolis, Maxine Waters, every media outlet, and the crowds outside chanting and screaming and demanding, you will come back with the right verdict. It cannot be argued that this was a fair trial if you were actually looking at all of the precedent that has defined that up to this point.
Well, I think you hit it on the nail on the head when you talk about whether or not the judge would allow them to move the trial. Because I thought the same thing today: is how many jurors sat there and said, "There's thousands and thousands of people that have burned our town down last year, and they are back, and they've brought friends." And they're gonna burn down my neighborhood, or they're gonna burn down my business or my place of employment if we don't bring forward a guilty verdict. Shane, what were your thoughts initially on this verdict?
I would kind of echo, I guess, or really echo what Walter said. You know, I'm not sure what this does for our future. You know, as far as the way trials are going to be conducted now. I mean, this is it's the type of thing where it's like, it kind of makes you think about Minority Report or something a little bit, where it's, at some point I heard a lot of people talk about, there's video in this case. We can see the video. Why are we even having a trial? It's like, well, because that's the way the system works. We have due process, and, you gotta, the burden was on the state to prove this without, a reasonable doubt. And did they do that? I didn't see it, but, I guess maybe we're in the minority on that.
Well, and so I think the point here is that we don't know whether or not the case was judged on the merits of the evidence, and we can't have confidence in the idea that it was, because of that context, right? Because this trial was treated by all of the institutions that are tasked with being above it all and mature and objective and just, because all of those institutions treated it like a reality game show, and allowed the same plebeian forces that would affect the outcome of a Survivor series or something to come to bear over whether or not the verdict in this case was going to be guilty or not guilty. And the pressure that the jurors were clearly under. I mean, look, they acquit this guy, their lives are over. They will not be able to go anywhere or do anything without having to look over their shoulder for the rest of their lives. And they know it. This took place in a context where you had, as we've already kind of inferred, members of the media, politicians, activists openly saying due process shouldn't be a thing here. Why are we even bothering to have a trial? We should just cut to the chase and find the nearest tree for this guy. Without any hesitation, without any shame, without even trying to mask it or hide it whatsoever. And of course, the aforementioned pressure by the likes of President Joe Biden and what have you. So, I mean, there's just no arguing that this was a fair trial that took place in an objective fashion, that where the evidence was the deciding factor. I mean, you would have to be blind past the point of credulity. you would have to be stupid, basically, is what I'm saying, to not recognize that there was no justice here. Even if the verdict was correct, which again, I don't know, I don't think it was, but I can't say I know. But even if the verdict was correct, this process was not just.
Well, I thought that originally that Keith Ellison had overcharged, right? He brought forward these murder charges and did not bring second-degree manslaughter, which, if there's a case for, I believe that, if there was wrongdoing, that it should be second-degree manslaughter. And he didn't bring that charge forward. And so then when the case seemed to be falling apart last fall, and he said, well, maybe I should add that one, and then tried to. And then the defense was trying to, block it from being, no, you had your opportunity and you can't just come back and add charges later. And then when he finally got that one added, it was like, oh, well, maybe he won't be acquitted. Maybe he'll be charged with that, or convicted of that. So to be convicted of murder, it just seemed to be such a reach. Again, I'm not an attorney. I'm just, watching from the cheap seats. But factors that I think are influenced it, the riots last summer, the threatened riots now. We had a Congresswoman come out and say some pretty hateful things. The second degree manslaughter, being added, I thought was maybe it was helping the defense to say, well, maybe this is the only thing that you should be charging them with. And then, of course, what about the civil case settling right before the trial started? $27 million. Guilty, how much do you think that influenced the jury?
What about the fact that you had authorities in other jurisdictions releasing camera footage of other shootings in the context of this trial ongoing? You had, there were so many things that were being injected, and it could not be coincidental. When you put out that press release of, oh, here's the body cam footage from an incident that happened weeks and months ago, and we're just deciding to release it now, the context in which you're releasing that footage. That comes with an agenda. You are attempting to put your thumb on the scale of the climate in order to affect an outcome.
So where does this leave us with appeals?
My understanding is the judge actually kind of opened the door for appeals in the way he ruled on the Maxine Waters objection, right? When they brought that up, that she was what her from her language. So I think it will be appealed, and maybe that was give him a guilty verdict now, knowing it'll be overturned in appeals when the rioters are all gone home and went on to the next riot. Maybe that's a strategy for public safety, but I just feel I feel bad for the 3 police officers that are going to be their trial is starting in 3 months or 4 months, and then of course just for police officers that are on the job now. Why do they want to go to work tomorrow?
Yeah. Why would you ever want to be a police officer? Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody has a cell phone camera. Everybody's recording everything. People are installing dash cameras. Everything can be taken out of context, and your career will end even if you're innocent.
Yes, absolutely. And there are people who are forwarding notions online today that if they'd have forwarded them last week, I would have dismissed them as, that's a little conspiratorial. But today, you really do have to ask yourself, what's the end game of all this? Like, I don't presume stupidity on the part of my enemies. Okay, I credit them with at least as much intelligence as I have, if not more. All right, I'll be a little humble. They have to know what the outcome of their policies and their agenda is. In this case, as you just stated, police, and has been affirmed by anecdotes everywhere you look, police are fleeing their jobs in droves. They're looking for ways out. They're looking for early retirement. You're going to see an attrition of specifically good cops. People who care about doing the job the right way. People who care about the law and justice as you and I have always understood it. They're going to leave. They're going to be replaced. Who are they going to be replaced by? What are they going to be replaced by? There's a lot of talk right now about the prospect of federal policing.
Yep.
If the result of all of this attrition in staffing is the collapse of local police departments, it creates a crisis. And doesn't this fit the pattern of the left? Create a crisis and then come in with their solution. It creates a crisis where they can put forward a proposal to basically create the American Stasi.
Right. And this is what they do with everything. I mean, it's not just policing. We see this with climate change or, environment. I mean, I guess I said environment, but economic issues or healthcare. These are people that want top-down control, I think. And I think we, like you said, Walter, not long ago, I would have thought, crazy conspiracy theory nonsense with that. But you gotta look at what you're seeing and then make your judgment based on what you actually see, not what you think it should be, Yeah.
You talked about conspiracy theories. I do need to address one conspiracy theory that keeps on popping up in my Facebook feed and what people keep on sending me. Have you seen these pictures of Derek Chauvin's ears and in his face, and then people claiming that this isn't Derek Chauvin, like the person that on the street that committed this is not the same person. It looks just like the videos are showing like Joe Biden is not Joe Biden. It's like somebody else, some stand-in. And, they're showing look at his ear, look at all the parts of his face. And his, that is a conspiracy theory. This is Derek Chauvin, the one that was convicted. And that just seems ludicrous.
Well, and that's one that you can debunk by asking the question that conspiracy theorists always pose, which is who benefits? Who could possibly benefit from faking Derek Chauvin in the video? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, you brought up an interesting point about the Democrats' long game here. Their strategy. They're trying to defund the police. They want to systematically remove police. And they've been trying to do this legislatively. They've been trying to defund the police and change the laws, and they can't do that. So when you can't affect the supply, then let's just go after demand. Who wants to be a police officer? Let's just make that painful and drive people out of the profession, prohibit, or prevent people from coming into the profession who want to do good, and because they want to just change police, and they'll just do it this way by making it painful. And then, one of the big reforms that that we'll probably be debating in the Minnesota House, as well as many legislatures across the country, is immunity. The police have a certain amount of civil liability or civil immunity because of the job that they're in. And removing that would then make the person individually responsible for some of the civil penalties that can occur, and therefore would have to go out and get insurance. And the insurance companies would then assess you based on how many complaints you have, where you work, how hard of a policeman you are, right? Like how many complaints come in. It just is market driven, but would push. This is the argument from the left. Removing that immunity protection would push bad cops out of the industry because they wouldn't be able to be policed anymore. They wouldn't be able to afford the insurance. And it's the same kind of thing that maybe drives bad doctors out of healthcare, because if they make too many accidents, they don't get to be doctors anymore, or at least can't afford to. That's kind of the reason why Democrats want to move that away. The same could be said for teachers, bad teachers, and everything. But the cost of this, and in doing this, just basically like taking away the law enforcement's use of force, and turning everybody into like what they had in England, where everybody just walking around with a baton and no gun and a whistle. And that's kind of what they want to turn the police into.
Well, and here's how if you needed more evidence. Here's how it's insidious and disingenuous. They don't really want to defund police as such. They want to replace the current law enforcement infrastructure and replace it with something else. How do we know this, even though perhaps you haven't heard anybody overtly say it? We know it because somebody has to enforce all their BS, right? If you're gonna have gun control, then you're gonna have somebody who comes to my door to take my guns. If you're going to impose all these mandates and taxes and restrictions, you're going to have men with guns who ultimately are the last word on the subject of whether or not I or any other citizen complies. You have to have that force. And so if it's not the police, it's going to have to be somebody else. And right now, the problem they're running into, we've seen it over the course of the pandemic, where you've had pushback from local law enforcement, county sheriffs, police departments that have said, we're not enforcing this nonsense. We're not going to go around and tell kids they have to leave parks, or kick people out of their restaurants or because they're not wearing masks or whatever.
People in their own communities.
Right.
Which is important, Right.
The local culture, the lesser magistrate, that's a problem for the left unless and until they can get rid of that. They get rid of the lesser magistrate. They make it so that there is no lesser magistrate. It's just the empire and their stormtroopers.
Yeah, those are fighting words if you use the word stormtrooper or brown shirt in politics, because you just immediately bring up hateful rhetoric.
I hate this, and I hate the people who are pushing it. This is hateful rhetoric, rightfully so. When you're up against evil, when you're up against immorality, when you're up against forces that are looking to suppress and subjugate objectivity, the appropriate emotional response is hatred.
Yeah, and there's now, I think, 16 counties that have passed the Second Amendment county resolution. There was one, I think Becker County just did it this week. I put this resolution out on my website in December of 2019. If you go to jeremymunson.com/2A county, there's a resolution you can download and bring to your county commissioners. And the one that passed in Becker didn't have as much teeth as some other ones, but basically says that they support the Second Amendment. They're not going to enforce legislation that takes guns away from people. That's the concept. And so you're right. Local sheriffs are saying, A, I believe in the Second Amendment. I don't think people should have their guns taken away. But B, I'm not showing up into somebody's house at 3 a.m. when I know they're home to demand that they give up their guns. Because that's where you put officers in very dangerous conflict with the people, by the way, who have not committed a crime. These red flag laws that they're trying to push through, that the president is trying to get done by executive order, they're taking guns away from someone. You're guilty before you're proven guilty, right? There's no presumption of innocence. You take the guns away from someone, and then they can spend months and months arguing in the court on why they should have them back. And of course, the judge is never going to give guns back to someone if there's even a chance of them committing a crime with a gun or doing something or doing harm to themselves or others, because that wouldn't look good for a re-election, right? This person killed his spouse with a gun that Judge Johnson gave back to him. So it's a terrible policy to take guns away from someone who hasn't committed a crime. So in other news, I guess we could talk about what's happening at the legislature. We're going to be talking about police reform. That's going to come up again. We we passed this big package of police reforms last year in response to the killing of George Floyd. I guess you could say murder of George Floyd now. But after his death and the protests, they demanded action, and we went back and changed some stuff, got rid of warrior training and some things that could be viewed as hostile from the police. There was some things done, and it was done in a bipartisan way. And now they want to move the needle even further. And there'll be some stuff that comes up this week in the legislature. In fact, right now, I'm watching a floor session that I'm participating in remotely, as most legislators are. I have a thumbprint scanner. You can see right here. So when the vote comes up, I scan my thumb and vote yay, nay, or I can request to speak, and you can speak over Zoom. We're debating these enormous omnibus bills. We've been debating this since about noon, so 7.5 hours, on a commerce / green energy / a bunch of other pork that's been added to the bill, hundreds of pages long. And a couple things came up that I wanted to talk about. The reinsurance provision was offered by Republicans. And this is a program for those of you who buy private insurance through MNsure. So you don't go through your employer. You're of 4% of Minnesotans that buy insurance in this way. And in its private insurance, Blue Cross and stuff that's not through the state, through Minnesota Care. The premiums were getting out of control. Your deductibles were skyrocketing because the cost of care is increasing. So Republicans came forward with this socialist program called Reinsurance that says after you pay your $10,000 or $12,000 deductible, then the insurance company would pay your healthcare costs between $12,000 and $50,000. After $50,000, all taxpayers pay the cost of your care between $50,000 and $250,000. And then after $250,000, then the insurance company takes it over again. But this enormous chunk of healthcare coverage, you get cancer, you have a serious accident, these prices add up a lot. But the taxpayers, all taxpayers, not just the people in the private market, but all taxpayers pay this big chunk. In other words, insurance companies, who their sole purpose is to offset risk. It's to take risk away from you and offset it amongst everybody in that pool, in the insurance pool. They're taking a big chunk of their risk and putting it back on the government, socializing it. That's what reinsurance is. And by doing that, the insurance companies can charge less for their insurance premiums because they don't have the risk. And it's pure socialism. And in DC, Nancy Pelosi and Angie Craig are championing this. They want to push it out because it's one step further towards socialism. But in the state of Minnesota, Kurt Dowd and these lobbyists for the health insurance industry and the hospital association, they are pushing reinsurance again. It was put on as a Band-Aid for a year so they could try to lower healthcare costs. When Republicans were in charge of the House and Senate, they did hardly anything to lower healthcare costs. I got one small, bill for some price transparency through, but we're not letting people shop for care. We're not showing people what everything costs, and we're not lowering the cost of care. And this reinsurance thing came through. Do you guys buy insurance on the private market, or where do you get your insurance?
My wife has employer-provided insurance that covers our family, and she works for a healthcare company, so it works out pretty well.
Yeah, we get ours through our employment as well.
Yeah, and I think 70% of people get their health insurance through their employer, and then of course a whole bunch of people get their insurance through the government. But there's again a small percentage, a minority of people are self-employed, and they're not of retirement age, and they make more money than can get on Minnesota Care or Medicaid. So, they buy private insurance, but we're a small percentage of people. And so anyways, this reinsurance plan came up. So I stand up and I oppose it. And of course, Republican opposing a Republican proposal got a little heated on the floor. And so Kurt Doubt and I got in a little fighting match about it. And he claimed that I liked single payer, which is basically what this program is. So I had to turn it around on him, but then say, look, the lobbyists are the ones that are supporting this. Oh, and by the way, you work for a DC lobbying firm called Stateside & Associates, which represents pharmaceutical companies, which is one of the reasons why healthcare costs have just skyrocketed, because Obamacare didn't touch pharmaceutical costs. It basically said, whatever you want for your full price of it, we will pay. It was a horrible program, but the pharmaceutical industry is greatly at fault for the skyrocketing premiums. The other thing that came up on the floor was, unless you guys have any comments on reinsurance, or do you understand this and see it as a bad thing, or can you tell me why it's good?
No, it's definitely not good. I mean, reinsurance is something that exists in the private market and is a good thing in that context. Reinsurance in the private market means insurance for insurance companies. Like the insurance company has insurance on your policy in case you actually have to cash it in so that they don't go bankrupt, right? So it's kind of the Inception dream within a dream type scenario. This is actually like so much, once government dips its hand into it, this is kind of a bastardization of what reinsurance actually is. Just like the public option is a bastardization of what insurance actually is. And so it's kind of par for the course. It's something that, because so few people likely understand it, they can get away with characterizing it in whatever way they see fit. And it must be deeply traumatizing and triggering for Kurt Doubt to have you there calling him out on his BS.
Well, one of the things that they claim is that the reinsurance program was wildly successful. They wanted to lower healthcare premiums by 25%. They went to the insurance industry and said, how can we do this? And you're right.
Pay our bills.
Reinsurance is a real thing. I mean, I worked for a reinsurance company. For property casualty, if you own 5,000 properties in Key West and you don't want a hurricane to wipe out your entire company, you're going to take 80% of your policies and reinsure it, sell the insurance to Lloyd's of London or something, so that they carry the risk of a majority of your policies. That's what reinsurance, but that's all private. To then sell it to the government, or to not even sell it, just to have government cover the cost. So that's what the insurance industry said is, yes, we can lower the premiums for your people. Just how about you guys cover the costs, like from 50 to $250,000. And if you just did that, we would lower the cost by 25%. So it was miraculous. You dump $400 million in the back door of these corporations, and they lower the premiums. That was a shocker. So I agreed with them. Yeah, it works, but it's not a shocker. And so I opposed it. There was about, 7 or 8 people that voted against it on the Republican side. All the Democrats voted against it because they want pure socialism. And so it never got amended onto the bill. The big portion of the bill was about green energy. And I got up at the end of the bill. We had, hours and hours and hours of amendments and debate. And I spoke to the bill in general. I was on the energy committee, and there was so much racism in the bill, right? It's they wanted to spend money they want more solar panels in communities of color. They want to get rid of the trash burning energy facility. They would prevent you from not burning trash, because burning trash keeps it out of landfills, but you can't generate energy while you're burning trash in communities of color.
That makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah. The coal-fired power plant actually is in a very white area, right? It's in North Dakota. But so there was racism threaded throughout this whole bill. And I called it out because it's hypocritical. We're pushing green energy, pushing electric cars and windmills and solar panels that are all manufactured. They're mined and manufactured in third world countries with substandard labor conditions and environmental conditions. And there's a company, a Swiss-British conglomerate, that owns Congolese mines where they mine cobalt that they don't employ. They own 40,000 child slave laborers that work in these mines. And I had a Democrat from the committee call me last week and say, "You've been talking about this for years." And I actually Googled it. I went out to Apple, to their website, and I looked up, the environmental stuff, and they seem to be pretty good on it in human rights. But then I went to a website, I typed in what you wanted me to, Congo, mines. And oh my gosh, cobalt is in iPhones, and Apple has this, and they're one of the worst offenders with child slave labor. And then he said the company that owns these mines is publicly traded, and almost all state employees, it's in our retirement fund, this company. So I had a good time tearing into that on the House floor.
This sort of thing sticks in my craw extra bad. I'm up here in the north part of the state, and these are things that we can produce in our state without child labor and without all of the environmental restrictions and that sort of thing. We can do it the right way, and yet they won't let us do it here.
Yeah. I called that out as, the nickel mining in the Philippines that it destroys the environment. And yet we buy over half of our nickel from that country, and they won't let us mine here. And the response from liberals is, well, you can't mine nickel anywhere in the world without destroying the environment. Well, then why are we mandating electric cars that have 65% nickel content, or school buses? School buses, 2,000-pound batteries, 65% of it's nickel, and a bunch of cobalt mined by child slave laborers.
Because none of this is about what they say it's about. Like they've got the suckers who actually are true believers who buy into it, that it actually is somehow about saving the environment. But in reality, it's the environmental stuff, the green energy stuff, is fueled by exactly the same thing as that reinsurance provision. Lobbyists working for corporations that like that sweet, sweet money. It's all about the money. Yep. It's all about favoritism and, pleasing the king and getting your place at the top of the trough and getting up there in the economic pecking order. It has nothing whatsoever to do with saving the world. It never has. And you're just revealing that hypocrisy by pointing out these obvious flaws in their supposed earth-saving strategy.
Yeah, so there was a lot of bad provisions in the bill, and the environmental stuff I just had to call out as being hypocritical. We have massive hydroelectric power generation facilities in Manitoba, just north of us, that generate like 600 or 700 megawatts of power, but it's not quote unquote renewable under Minnesota law because we only allow very small hydroelectric plants. If it's a large one, it's not renewable, which is stupid. It's probably one of the cleanest energy sources we have, and it's constant 24 hours a day. But they don't allow it to be renewable under our law. It's just dumb.
Well, then there's the big bad nuclear, which is probably a whole nother conversation for another day. But that's something I've done a lot of reading about, and it's just amazing to me. I mean, we've seen actually relatively in the history, we've seen so few actual accidents with this sort of thing, and it's really, really a very, very safe source of. You want to talk about bang for your buck, tons and tons of energy without any carbon emission at all. But obviously, as we all know, that's something you can't even bring up or talk about.
Yeah, and it's load-based power, which is 24-hour day power, which is so important when people are talking about community solar gardens, with which I call industrial solar arrays out in the cornfields. Right. They don't understand that we need 24-hour day power, and that comes from coal, natural gas, and nuclear. And actually, I will give wind a little credit that wind is very predictable, and we can schedule how much it's going to be generating, and it does generate a lot at night, which is good. But of course, when it's really hot in the summer, it's usually when you're running your air conditioning when the wind isn't blowing. So on the House floor, so we got this debate that's still going on, and I know people will be like, "Why aren't you participating?" Well, all of the amendments. First of all, the bills are posted ahead of time, so we know 2 days ahead of time this enormous omnibus bill is coming to the floor. Second, all of the amendments have to be posted at noon the day before, and you have 5 hours to write amendments to the amendments. So you have the bill, you have amendments, and then you have amendments to the amendments, and that's all the further you can go. And so the amendments to the amendments are posted at 6 p.m. We caucus the bill again. So we caucus the 2 days before to figure out what's in the bill and to write amendments. And then we caucus the night before to go through all of the amendments and the amendments to the amendments so we can read them, understand what they do, and then we just write what we're going to vote, yes or no, on each one. So I have my cheat sheet already set out that I've read all the stuff and asked questions, and then I've had time to reach out to people in my district. Does this impact you? Do you support this? What is this going to do to your industry or your life? And get my feedback, make my list, and then the floor session starts and the speeches start, and it's all about just theatrics, right? It's just, people getting out there and standing on their soapbox, and some of it's legitimate and some of it's just parroting what the lobbyist told them or whatever. And but it goes on for hours. I mean, we've got 134 legislators, and the speaker, usually comes to us and says, "Hey, could you limit your debate to 2 minutes?" Well, no, and I'm not. I'm going to talk about this green energy thing for a half hour because it really upsets me. And you'll get a few of us that'll go on for a while, but it drags out debate for all day to debate one of these enormous omnibus bills. And the fact I'm voting no on the omnibus bills because they're unconstitutional and against our state constitution that requires that every bill have, one subject and the subject be expressed in its title. So it's pretty easy votes for me.
Yeah, well, and as we've covered before on previous episodes, this isn't like when I go to city council, where we have open meeting laws and you actually are required to deliberate the merits of the policy in a venue where it's been noticed and people can attend, and you actually are in the moment considering, is this good or is this bad? What are my questions? Can I get some answers from staff? As you lay out. At the state level, it's all a script. It's all kabuki theater. I mean, every once in a while, kind of like with your interaction with Kurt Doubt, you get these moments where there's a little bit of ad lib going on. But in terms of what the agenda is and what leadership knows is going to happen because they've whipped the votes, all of that is scripted. It doesn't really require you to be sitting there on the edge of your seat with your eyelids pinned open, paying rapt attention to everything that's going on.
Yeah, and it's also important to note, I serve in the Minnesota House, so it is very scripted because of the deadlines where everything has to be posted ahead of time. However, it is not like that in the Minnesota Senate. In the Minnesota Senate, there are no deadlines. You can bring forward amendments on the fly. You can set and write, changes. And when, Bob brings forward an amendment to say, no, we're going to do this, and we're only going to buy solar panels made in the USA, then Susie can come forward and say, well, how about in the USA or other countries if they can prove child slave labor wasn't used? Oh, that's an agreement. We'll work on that. And they negotiate and they actually compromise in the Senate real time. And that's good. That's a good thing. This is just scripted. And it didn't used to be this way. About 12 years ago, you could still do amendments on the fly. There was no deadline. And then everybody had to pay attention all the time because you don't know what's going to happen. And you don't know these super hyper partisan amendments that come to the floor. There could be compromise in the middle and you could actually create good legislation. And that's why people would pay attention. This is done because the leadership gets to tell you, here's how you're voting. And this happens in the DFL caucus, the old House Republican caucus. In our caucus, we do it differently because we read every bill. And I will give credit to the Posse caucus because although they're part of the DFL caucus, they also caucus separately and vote differently and are little, they're not really controllable by management. So that's kind of the breakdown in the House. And of course, in the Senate, you have three caucuses too. You have the Independent caucus, the Republican, and the Democrat caucus, because there's some Democrats that left and started their own caucus this year.
Well, and that also harkens back to a conversation we've had previously here on the show, where you have to ask yourself the question, what's the object of that change from having it be deliberative and interactive and relational and organic to a cookie cutter that's controlled by a few people at the very tippity top? I mean, why? This is a question I would love to ask Kurt Doubt publicly, and he have to give an answer. Why should I care who my legislator is in the Minnesota State House? If you're the one making all the decisions, can I just put a monkey in there and you could just train it to click green or red, depending on, whatever treat you offer them? I mean, am I actually being represented? Is my community and our interests and the things we care about actually being part of the discussion? And we know the answer. The answer is no, because there is no discussion. That's what you're telling me, is that the process has been scripted to the point where no interest can be injected past the point where the people who are really in charge decide, we're not talking about this anymore, we're just doing it.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, Kurt Dowd went off on Jamie Long today, who's the chair of the Energy Committee, because somebody offered an amendment for the energy portion of the bill, and Jamie Long says, I'm not going to be accepting that amendment today, I'm sorry. And Kurt Dowd's like, well, wait a minute. Everyone in this room has an election certificate. You don't speak for all the Democrat members. They have a right to vote how they want to vote, which was, a little irony based on how he manages things. Another interesting tidbit, on Saturday, we debated the transportation bill all day long, like 10, 12 hours. And Representative Torkelson, who's a Republican from Brown County, actually he lives in my district, but he represents Brown County. He brought forward an amendment to give driver's licenses to illegal immigrants, which was a pretty controversial amendment for a Republican to bring forward. But the Chamber of Commerce is one of the biggest supporters of driver's licenses for illegal immigrants and big agriculture companies, because they want their employees to be able to get to work. I mean, I've been told that directly by a chamber member. We need our employees to get to work. I'm like, but you're breaking federal employment law, but you want your employees to get to work. You want that second class of worker that you can kind of dangle their immigration status over their head. I mean, that's not right. We need immigration reform, but it needs to happen in D.C. By giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants, you're giving big corporations a big handout. And so I just was shocked to see the amendment come forward. Now, Glenn Grunhagen spoke out against it, and then it went to a vote, but nobody called for a roll call. Nobody said, we need to make this on the record. So they did it by voice vote. It was a pre-agreement where Kurt Dowd had made an agreement with the Democrats to bring forward this amendment. There won't be a roll call vote. Let's just get it into the bill. And then when it goes to conference committee with the Senate, they can say, well, this was brought forward by Republicans. This is the Republican language to give driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. So nobody got a roll call. Now you're going to say, well, Munson, why didn't you say it? Well, Kurt Dowd has a rule that nobody in his caucus will raise their hand when a new House Republican caucus member asks for a roll call. And we saw this, and we have all this video time and time again. We do it. I've asked for a roll call 3 times on one amendment just to make people not raise their hands, to see if they would raise their hands, because you can only see 12 people on the floor. The rest are by Zoom, and they don't raise their hands on Zoom. They send an email to the speaker, so it's anonymous. But yeah, nobody will give us a hand on really good conservative legislation, on a good amendment. They won't do it just because Kurt Dowd said no. So, but his members, nobody asked for it. And when the voice vote came and all the Republicans were screaming no, you could hear the longest serving legislator, who's a Republican, say, oh no, we should have roll called that. So, the whole process was, done without the knowledge of the majority of the members of the old House caucus. And it was just this back deal arrangement to sell out on Republican values just because the lobbyists want this for, their members.
How does a voice vote work via Zoom?
It doesn't. That it doesn't. You can't hear people screaming over Zoom. So it's just prearranged. Now, interestingly enough, we go by the rules in the House are, it's by default, it's a voice vote unless a member asks that it be on the record. And you say, Madam Speaker, I'd like a roll call. Then she says, Representative Munson would like a roll call. Are there 15 hands? You need 15 people to raise their hand on the House floor in order to get a roll call. Now, a lot of other states are only 2, or, one person in a second gets a roll call. Some states are just 1 person. Minnesota's 15 hands. So when you have a caucus of 5, you need people in the old caucus or the Democrats to raise their hand in support. That's how it works. But then for the voice votes, sometimes legislators want it to be on the record, and some people don't want a vote to be on the record. This one, Republicans did not want it to be on the record. And so they have an agreement already with the speaker. But you can challenge the, let's see, if you do a voice vote and you don't think that the speaker ruled in your favor, what do? And you call division, right? Madam Chair, or Madam Speaker, I call division. And then you're supposed to stand showing how you voted, and she can count the people standing. Under Zoom, that is ruled where that's not part of the rules anymore. There is no division. Voice vote is how she calls it. People scream. People are shouting. I can hear the voices. They shout no multiple times. No, 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 no. You don't know who's saying what. So
absolute insanity. Totally ludicrous.
Unreal.
Now, the first time that we went into this, where the voice votes really came up, was a year ago when the four of us then in the New House Republican Caucus brought forward a resolution to end the emergency powers. We worked on this for weeks. Right after he declared an emergency, we went and met with the lawyers and said, how do we end this through constitutionally? And we wrote this resolution to end the emergency. We brought it forward, and Kurt Dowd opposed it because it was brought forward by us. But it was correctly written. It's the same language that everybody's bringing forward today. So he opposed it, and he told his caucus not to give us hands. So we asked for a roll call. Well, the only way the speaker knew how to do that was by going and asking everyone, going down the list, Acom, Anderson, what? So we went down the list, and everybody had to say yes or no to whether or not they would give us hands. In the chamber, when you ask for hands, the video camera that films the floor that you guys watch on YouTube pans up to the ceiling so nobody can see whether legislators are raising their hands. But when they did when they had to do it by roll call, everybody was on the record. If you go back and watch the tape on YouTube, they actually edited out that 11-minute sequence where they're asking everybody. But for those of us live streaming it to our Facebook pages, the video is all there on the record. And so there were only 12 Republicans that voted to give us hands for that roll call. And of course, we didn't get the 15, so there wasn't a roll call. But when they did the voice vote, they had to go through and ask everybody how they were voting, because we challenged it with division. So that's when they decided they would not do division anymore, because technically it's not on the record, but it was through video. So that's why we lost the ability to do division.
The question for the listener is, do you think this process is designed to benefit you? Do you think you're the beneficiary of all this? Do you think you're the beneficiary of the way that the House is structured and the rules and the Zoom modifications that have been made? Do you think this is all being done in a sincere good faith effort to make Minnesota a better place for the average common resident? Because I don't.
I'll take that. No.
Yeah.
It's all really convenient, isn't it? I mean, if you're the party that likes to do this thing through bullying and top-down control, I mean, this is perfect.
Yeah, I see a lot of the rules as increasing the centralization of power in the House. The Speaker, and first of all, I know we've covered this, and I covered it in previous podcasts, but the Speaker of the House chooses the chair of each of the committees. You would think that maybe the members of the majority get to elect who the speaker of, or who the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee is, since maybe they want to put a doctor there or somebody. No, and it's not based on seniority. It's just based on who the speaker chooses. So the speaker selects the chair of all 31 committees, and that person decides which bills are heard and which ones, can actually get a hearing, because there's 5,000 bills that are introduced. There's only a few hundred, or 400 or 500 that are actually receive a hearing and get put into omnibus bills. So the chair of the committee, under the direction of the speaker, does all that. So if you are an industry that wants a piece of legislation through, you talk to the speaker. You don't talk to the chair, or you don't talk to the committee members or your legislator. You go right to the top, you write a check. That's kind of how it works. That's how legislation gets heard. And most importantly, that's how legislation does not get heard. If you want a bill like mine, the right to shop, you want the right to shop, you want to see prices on healthcare, That's going to change. It's going to empower patients, and it's going to take power away from the hospitals and the insurance companies and lawmakers and everybody else making money off healthcare. That's not going to get a hearing. Even the Democrat chair of Commerce last session, who refused to hear my bill, she worked for Blue Cross Blue Shield. That's how this stuff works, and that's the swamp of the legislature.
You really do have to wonder, when we consider something like that, or the previous conversation we had about lobbying as a legislator, why do we even have bribery as a law on the books? I mean, what's the point? I mean, who are we going to convict for bribery? Somebody who clumsily accepts a bag of cash from somebody and votes the way they want on a law. And we're like, oh, geez, he should go to prison. And yeah, sure, he should. But that's the order of business. That's standard operating procedure. We've just developed all these ways to mask it, which are not particularly effective. And we're comfortable with that. I mean, at some point, we have to make the decision whether or not the principle behind bribery law is a principle that should be upheld or not. Because right now, it's not.
Well, and this is just the state legislature that I'm talking about. I mean, Washington, D.C. is the deep end of the swamp. And that is, it is horrible. I've talked to freshmen, Congress people and seasoned Congress people about the process out there and all the lobbying that goes on and who makes the decisions. And I talked to a freshman legislator. You should write a bill that does this. And he's like, honestly, I can't write bills. Leadership lets me or tells me what my reelection bill is, and I can't just write any bill, right? And it's kind of how it works in the House here. I mean, you can't just write anything. You have to kind of get approval from your management. But DC is horrible in how it's done. And what's shocking, you said it's surprising that bribery happens like this. In Washington, D.C., 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, it was still legal to front run. They were immune from, they could buy and sell stocks based on the legislation they saw coming through. They were exempt from that law. Insider trading, I should be clear. Right. They were exempt from the insider trading law. They're the ones that are writing billions of dollars in handouts and mandating that government buy this product or that you buy a certain product, and they could go out and buy stocks in their portfolio. Are you kidding me? That was still illegal, and it just became illegal. And I want to say it was 5 years ago. Maybe it was 10, but it's when I was politically active, found this out, and it was disgusting.
Well, how do you think all of these career politicians, U.S. senators, U.S. representatives, go on down the line, how do you think they make their millions of dollars? These are like the elite. These are amongst the 1%. These folks, they don't have a job. Their job is being a legislator. So where are they getting that? They don't get paid that by the government, right? So where is this money coming from? How do they make their money? Asked and answered. We know. And we just, and that's why, bringing it full circle back to how the show started with the Chauvin thing, and do we even have fair trials anymore? The corruption runs so deep, and the root of it is our indifference and our pretending not to see and going along to get along because our guy agrees with us on this, that, or the other thing that we really care about. And so we're going to swallow hard and just accept it. The only way we reverse the trajectory of all of this, everything we've been talking about tonight, is to establish within ourselves individually the conviction that we're not going to let this kind of stuff go by without calling it out for what it is.
Well, I think you're right. And one of the things that I try to do, I mean, in bringing in with this show and in pretty much everything I do on Facebook, is to bring more transparency to the government, to show people what's going on. And what I don't do is I don't protect one party, right? You see this, everything gets spun. I try to be honest with people, and I'll call out disgusting behavior on either side of the aisle. And, when I was in the health finance committee, where we spend, 42% of all taxpayer dollars in the state, they wanted to lower the cost of prescription drugs, which is, admirable, but they wanted to do it by setting caps on what drugs could be, EpiPens, they're out of control. Insulin, out of control costs. I will agree. But they want to set the cap on what it could be. And that would immediately drop the prices. It would drop health insurance costs and insurance costs, which sounds like a good thing. But when you empower government, when you empower legislators that make $40,000 a year to set the price of a drug that companies make billions and billions of dollars on, you empower lobbyists to give me money, you incentivize them to put more money into government, more money into elections. 80% of the House races in Minnesota, you can buy for $50,000. If you had $50,000, you could take a candidate that you like as a company and get them into the legislature. So for $1 million, you could own the Minnesota House of Representatives. That would be a small investment for these, for lobbying firms.
Yeah.
In fact, you could just like Stateside Associates, just give a legislator $100,000 a year salary and put them on the payroll. That's not illegal under Minnesota law, and that's occurring today. You can influence policy, but the more power that government takes in setting prices, you create more of that bad behavior, and the prices will probably be higher than they are now. Because legislators are like, gee, I didn't know EpiPens cost so much money to make, so I've been convinced I think that they need to be $800 a piece. So, I made the argument in committee, and I asked the legislator, do you think empowering legislators to set the price of drugs will increase or decrease the amount of money that the pharmaceutical industry spends on elections? And the person said, that's really an interesting question. It's a Democrat, admitting, yeah, you're onto something,
Yeah. Well, and let's be clear the implications of that. These large corporations having the capacity to buy legislators is fundamentally no different than them having the capacity to employ private armies. I mean, that's what it is, because government at its essence is the institutionalized use of force. And so when you have an entity like a corporation that has purchased undue influence over that use of force and wields it in order to set a price or engage in any sort of market manipulation, it's a very cutesy way of doing what the mafia does, which is, walk down the street and walk into the storefront with a gun tucked under their shirt, being like, hey, nice business you got here, and eliminating their competition. And again, these are things that instinctively I think we all know. And we're just like, well, what are you going to do? That's the world we live in. This is just the way it is. Well, because we've accepted it as long as we have, this type of corruption, we now live in a world where people can burn down cities and tamper with juries, and they're now saying that this is the way. Look at what we did. This is how we get justice. This is how we get what we want. So let's do more of it. There's a trajectory to these things.
And I think that people are so fed up, and this is what we saw, the big Trump wave of people coming in. These are the people that have never been engaged in politics. My brother never voted in his life. He hates politicians, right? All politicians lie. I hate them. They're never working for us. And, I think Trump exposed a lot of that and brought people into politics who were otherwise not engaged. But Shane, what do you think that we need to do more of in order to bring some? Is it transparency of government, or is that a burned out, overused word? What do we need to do to take back our country in 30 seconds?
I agree with Walter. Yeah, I agree with Walter, though. I mean, the onus lies on us as individuals on this. I don't think there's anything at the top that can be done at this point. It's all up to all of us down here on the bottom realizing that, we've all been pretty comfortable, but this stuff's starting to hit us at home now a little bit, more and more. And it's going to continue to more and more. And I think it's just going to take people getting fed up. Like you said, a lot, I wasn't a big Trump guy, but I understand that he inspired people to kind of come out of the woodwork and maybe, take this stuff a little more seriously, because we are starting to see this stuff affect us a little more. So yeah, I guess that's my idea. I think the individual has been lost in our culture, and I think we need to get back to that. We need to teach our kids at home. I homeschool. I like seeing more and more people. If there's any one good thing about the pandemic, maybe it's that more people are spending more time teaching their kids the way that they want, with their values and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think it starts with us, and until we all stop being polite and comfortable, nothing's going to change.
Bingo.
Yeah, and I think, for me, some of the biggest thing we can do within government is to eliminate these multi-subject omnibus bills, so that the crap doesn't get built up to go through the system. If things were individual bills, you could hold your legislator accountable for how they vote. Term limits would be huge for me. I think getting rid of the power of the incumbency. It's so hard to run against an incumbent legislator because they have name recognition. And
that's one of those things that sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I apologize about that, but that's one of those things. I think I brought that up to you at one time, Jeremy, that I really would like to see Democrat or Republican, the D or the R, taken off of ballots, because I think there are so many people that go in and vote up and down, Democrat, 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 Democrat in our state. I think if you took that off the ballots and you just had the name of the candidate there, it puts the onus on the people to actually know who they're voting for.
Well, it does shift it from party recognition to name recognition, which again, one of the reasons why I support term limits, because Republicans will run for office, in a state house, they'll win, and then they vote like a Democrat, and then nobody ever throws them out because they recognize the name, and they like to vote for the winner. There's a natural instinct that I want to vote for the winner, so they vote for the name they recognize. And then you get somebody in there that just gets corrupted over time, and you can't throw them out because I said races cost $50,000. They shouldn't cost $50,000, but an incumbent legislator that's well known in their district that has good name ID, that's how much money it takes to blanket the district repeatedly with the new person's name to match that name recognition on the ballot. And so, that's
maybe they go hand in hand. I mean, getting rid of the party and then also term limits. That would solve that problem. Those two things.
Yeah, term limits would be great, and also some campaign finance reform. There's I'd like to see a campaign finance reform. Right now, we have all these PACs that are, heavily influencing the legislation. And look at, I'm just voting right now. There's PACs that heavily influence, outside money, right? And a lot of it's because in Minnesota, there can only be, you can only donate $1,000 to a candidate. You can't donate more than that. And so they just donate the rest to a PAC, and the PAC does all the dirty work, but that the voter doesn't know where the money's coming from, because it's hit through, one organization donates to a PAC that then donates to another company, and you lose track of that. If I know that my legislator just supported, legislation that's benefits the pharmaceutical industry, I want to know how many pharmaceutical, companies donated to him. I can't see that because in Minnesota, a corporation can't donate to a candidate. So I think opening up the campaign finance laws to allow money directly to go to candidates brings more transparency. And the money is still going to be spent either way. It's just a more direct and more accountable way if you change the campaign finance laws.
Yeah. Well, and again, the question is, who are these laws designed to benefit? Who are these laws designed to serve? Is it designed to make the process of nominating, supporting, and running people more accessible to mom and dad and your neighbor and the guy down the street? Or is it made to obscure the process for those common folk, those everyday folk, and give the keys to the kingdom to those in the esoteric know, the priest class of the political world?
Yeah, well, I think this is not a very uplifting podcast. I think we need to wrap it up with something.
Last time you bring me in, right?
Yeah, let's think of something that's happened in the last week politically that's been a good thing. Walter, can you think of something good?
Well, so a couple of things. Both of them very anecdotal, not headlines. I saw a phrase on Twitter this week that I really liked. I don't remember the guy who coined it, but the phrase was creeping sense of dignity. And he used that phrase in the context where he was discussing efforts by different forces in the culture to suppress your sense of dignity, to make you feel bad about yourself, to make you feel ashamed of being an American or whatever status they're going after. And so he was making the point that, people, if you don't constantly assail people with guilt, then their creeping sense of dignity, it's like the grass, it's going to grow back, right? If you just leave people alone, eventually they're going to start feeling good about themselves and proud to be Americans again. And that's a positive. It doesn't sound very positive at face value, but it's a positive in the sense that the natural trajectory, the natural inertia of our culture is toward self-actualization and a sense of dignity and pride and a desire to be virtuous, which is something you can really only attain in a context of liberty. And so knowing that, being reminded of that kind of reinvigorated me, that we are on the side of what is right, what is good, what is life-affirming. And because of that, we have an advantage over our opponents. And the second thing is, with all that's been going on with the protests and rioting in the streets and the Black Lives Matter stuff and George Floyd and Derek Chauvin and Dante Wright, I've seen a lot of young people, kids, high school kids, engaging on social media and just protesting their little hearts out about how horrific the system is and how we need to have social justice and racial justice. Now, you could look at that and you could say how terrible that they're being brainwashed into a worldview that's demonstrably false and has all sorts of problems. But I choose to see the silver lining, which is that kids, students, and indeed everyone everywhere has a natural desire for moral clarity and moral purpose. People want to be right. They want to be righteous. They want to be on the side of good. They want to be the hero. And they look for opportunities to demonstrate virtue in themselves and in their community. The problem that we have on the right is that we have completely ceded all of that territory to the left. The left, with their racial justice narratives and their social justice nonsense, they have crafted a new religion, a new priesthood that bestows upon people a certificate of virtue based upon whether or not they subscribe to their ideas. And people are taking that and they're running with it because they want to be on the side of good. By contrast, we on the right have, over the course of the past couple of decades, adopted this sort of laissez-faire, whatever.
Off.
Yeah, whatever you want to do is cool, live and let live. And there's a kernel, like there's something within there. The libertarian impulse of live and let live is a correct impulse, but it's been perverted and metastasized to the point where we've allowed it to be weaponized against us, to where we're called out as moralizers and zealots if we say, no, I'm right and you're wrong. And yet that's all the left is doing, is saying that they're right and we're wrong. And so the fact that kids are hungry for a platform to stand on and something to stand for, it presents an opportunity for us to present them with the actual moral high ground and get them excited about becoming warriors for real justice.
Well, and to kind of piggyback on the liberty theme there, my good story this week, I really enjoy seeing people like I think it was Bill Maher, however you say his name, the talk show guy. He had a whole segment on how the lockdown states are losing and the anti-lockdown states appear to be doing much, much better with COVID. And it was a cool segment because he really went into how, maybe liberty and not tyranny is really the righteous way. I mean, it's something that we know, but seems like a lot of people need to learn that again.
I used to live in Los Angeles in 96, 97. And it was when Bill Maher started a show called Politically Incorrect. Did you guys ever used to watch that, the old show before he was canceled? I think he was on Comedy.
To be honest with you, that's the first place that I ever saw Ron Paul, believe it or not. So yeah,
I used to love this.
Got me all started on this.
And in Los Angeles, if you want to go on a really cheap date, you can go to a studio recording of a show. But I used to go to watch Politically Incorrect almost weekly. I would go there and watch the show be filmed. And it was really, I really liked the show. I thought he was great. And now he kind of went off the liberal deep end. But good things for me this past week that I saw, not really good, but positive news was that I've been trying to push for accountability for pharmaceutical companies. They have complete immunity against lawsuits for vaccines. If you manufacture a vaccine, there's no incentive for you to get the quality control down so you're not damaging or hurting people once you get it licensed. And so I'm just trying to bring awareness to that and to make sure that people are looking at these vaccines and trying to decide which one that they should be using, if at all. And the Johnson & Johnson being pulled was actually a positive thing, that the system seems to be working. Government isn't just cramming this down our throats. And that was a good thing, because now people are a little more aware of some quality control and maybe that there is a risk. And as long as they know that there's a risk out there, there should be a choice. And so that was kind of a good thing. Also, in the public safety bill that we're debating right now or voting on stuff, no-knock warrants were added. It's actually not a horrible public safety bill. I've seen worse. But no-knock warrants are in here, banning no-knock warrants. Civil asset forfeiture, which is, I think it's something that I really support, getting rid of civil asset forfeiture. This is taking your car from you before you've been convicted of a crime. If you get pulled over for drunk driving, even if you're found innocent, they can still take your car as long as you don't have a loan on it. If you have a loan on it, the banks have lobbied to say that you can't take it.
Yeah.
So keep a loan on your junker. But civil assets forfeiture, I think, is a major reform is needed. And I think that talking about these issues and on how they are for liberty is a good platform. And it's, again, like what you touched on, Walter, Republicans need to take back civil rights. We need to be the ones championing civil rights like we used to as a party. And somehow the Democrats have taken this from us, right? We were the ones restoring civil rights for people because the Democrats took it away. And somehow they have reversed that on us. And Republicans were always pushing for more government force. We want government to know, and so I think another win this week was that the governor decided not to issue curfews again. It went bad for him the first time and he said no. And I think relatively things have been pretty calm and there wasn't riots after the Chauvin verdict. So I think that's been, people are starting to pay attention, especially with the media getting pulverized by rubber bullets and mace, that people are understanding that we should have some freedom out there, and it doesn't just apply to the press; it should apply to everybody. So, civil rights, I think, coming up on the Republican side a little bit should be good.
We've kind of become the punk rock side a little bit. You know what I mean? We're the guys out here, anti-establishment nowadays. It's kind of funny to me how, the supposed, cool guys on the left or whatever. It's not so much like that anymore. They're complete establishment now. I think it was, I forget which punk band. One of the lead singers from one of the big punk bands from the 70s and 80s just came out the other day and sounded completely establishment. And I was just thinking, oh my God, what happened to these people? But
you want to see the just a great microcosm of that. Rage Against the Machine.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Was out advocating for compliance with lockdowns and mask mandates. I mean, it doesn't get more ironic than that. Yes,
they'll do what you told you.
What you told. Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. This has been the case for a long time. Perhaps it was always really the case that the left is only posing as countercultural and anti-establishment. They are, in fact, the advocates for centralized authority, establishment power, and anti-populism. On top of civil rights, I think that opportunity for Republicans is populism, not unchecked populism, because that can go in a bad direction, right. But just the things that we've been talking about here tonight, where there's very obviously systems in place to keep the people from having influence over their own government so that the lobbyists and the corporations can have it. Going after that and doing so with reckless abandon is something that would make a party very popular.
Well, very good. Thank you, gentlemen, for a great conversation about relevant topics this week. And I know we keep on talking about having those folks from the education group to talk about equity, but stuff keeps coming up every week where we're going to fill a whole episode with current events. And I think it's been really helpful. I've got some great feedback from people that have been downloading the podcast. For those listening, if you're just streaming it on YouTube or Facebook, you can go to our podcast and search The Omnibus Podcast on Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, Apple, whatever Apple's called now. It used to be called iTunes. And Apple
Podcasts.
Yeah. And really wherever you download your podcast. So download it, subscribe to it so that you're notified when we put a new episode out there. And you can reach out to me by my email address, jeremy@jeremymunson.com. You can request if you want to hear about topics on the podcast. We're always looking for good information and good topics. So thank you very much gentlemen, for being on the show again and for being on the Omnibus Podcast, where all subjects are germane.